Okay, we're going to take an interesting look here at modern science's equivalent and beliefs on human populations from well over 200,000 years ago in its origin. Now, they still have an out of Africa theory going on here, but we know now that we can beat this 200,000 year age actually up here in Europe with Gracopithecus freibergii and Auranthropithecus macedonius. So it shows separate origins, and the idea of going out of Africa becomes going into and out of Africa a couple of times, forming two different populations and morphs. One population of Negroids, which only stems from right in here. You can there's a boundary of the Sahara that begins. Of course, it's a green Sahara up until about 6 to 7,000 BC, but that's another ideal. And then there are multiple mass migrations back and forth out, some leading up into Mongolia and into China, others down and into India. There's another people involved as Denisovans, which no longer exist but were absorbed into other populations, and you see them in Australia and in Lower India and the Melanesian island people. And so let's look at this, and you can glean some good information out of this. And we found Cape people, which I showed you, Caucasian red ochre burials and stuff that are down here in Blombos Cave. Then there's the Hofmeyr site that's still evident here also. And then they're found many that are through the Cape area and so on. Then we have Egypt, which leads up into and sneaking past the Sahara and the open savanna lands here, which are full of all kinds of lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And we have the front of Africa, and then the Caucasian population that forms around the Mediterranean, which they're still not showing here at 100,000 BC, but let's continue and they will envelop it here rather quickly. They still don't say there's anybody in North Africa. I find this strange on their portrayal because they know about Jebel Erud here that dates, well into right now. We're at about 85, 90,000. No, we're in the 90,000 range. It starts to rotate, and let's look around the world at populations that were here. And they're saying that all of the world here would have been about 1 million people or less. And then they have a treachery down that comes into South America here. And again, I want to show that to you. Here, the leading in part, where here it's somewhere around 20,000 years ago and coming out of the last ice age, that the population would have rippled and come down through here. Farming begins and it really starts to grow. And the other side here that becomes evident that they're not showing just yet, here we go, would have been a lot more populous. Now the data that we get, we can only show, or they're only compiling of millions of people is each dot, and we're going from the year 1 AD, the starting of like the Han Dynasty and Roman empires in India. And you can see the amount of population in there. Also, I want to note the sparseness of the area of the Negroids here in West Africa, right? And in Brazil, there's a decent population. You have your Olmecs and your Aztecs, and your Central Americans, and they don't show much. I don't know if they didn't compile very much data on Indians across the United States here, but they don't show much data here. They show the northeastern or northwestern Indian population and the ones that are pretty much the lower Californian, I guess, and coming through there. But also, they're not showing, they're under 1 million people in Australia. The islands here only have a couple of million people into them, but Chinese population is taking off like crazy through the Han Dynasty, and India is becoming overpopulated up in its northern region. And it gets worse once the Silk Road gets going, and then it takes off even worse than that. And through time, that's become one of the areas that are the most overpopulated in the world. And indeed, it's becoming somewhat of a desert wasteland there, so it can cause a lot of problems. Um, you'll see them as time goes on here. We're getting up to 200 AD. You'll see little dots starting to show up in places, little popcorn dots, and this shows you population growth in those areas. And it does go up, but it also goes down. Here's the golden age of India starting and the Silk Road really taking off. And you can see small dots happening in each place. We've actually lost some up here in Northern Europe. A few dots went away. I don't know if you're noticing, but now we're starting to bring a few back in different places. And if you watch Northern Europe through this, you can actually see some migrations and some ripples that are coming out of the bluer area around in here and running up into here, and then these are scooting over, and it's what we found over time. Still, we have very little population in South America. Mexico seems to be somewhat stable, right? Here we have a few more million people that are showing up here in sub-Saharan and Negroid Africa, and of course the Amazigh and the Berber people are already showing evident, and they are showing the ones across here, I guess, which would be Morocco and Carthage, and Egypt is quite well taken off, of course, and so you can see where the populations are really hugging to in the main part. So they're talking about millions. If the whole open area doesn't have a spot, if they have a spot that's probably about the size of my pointer, and there's less than 1 million people in it, there's not a dot. Basically, is how this is working here. Now we get the Silk Road fixed up, and you can see India is filling up quite quick. China has actually gone up and down and twisted and moved north as it becomes better and better climate through the warmer and warmer times coming here. You can see the islands haven't really grown much, but India has packed itself up here in the north, and gunpowder gets invented, and that changes things a little bit too. And then we start to see the northern European population take off, and you get a few more dots and popcorn starting to happen there, and you can definitely see India keeps going, China keeps going. Now we're getting into 1100 AD, and you can see Europe really starting to take off. Navigation and compasses and such take off, and it really gets going. The start of the sub-Saharan slave trade takes off now, and you can see their population is starting to grow due to just being exposed to the people. But yet then the bubonic plague takes off, and it wipes out and holds back most of northern Europe, but not India, not China. And so we're left more at this range here going into 1500s. And the Europeans arrive here in the Americas, start the transatlantic slave trade, and then of course bringing modern medicines and modern methods to them, they start taking off also. Egypt grows again in the Delta area. Sub-Saharan West African, or what we call the Ivory Coast, starts taking off somewhat. You can see India and everything take off, and then here we start to see Europe just popcorn and starts to migrate, starts to push and twist. You can see North America starting to get populated, Sub-Saharan Africa starting to get populated along with West Africans through the slave trade and what happened through that. Now we're at 1900s and it's well over, and things just start going crazy, and you can see India filling up, China becoming solid, Europe becoming fairly solid, West Africa becoming solid. It's really grown that much in that short amount of time. It kind of catches you off guard here, but they believe it's leveling off, and that somewhere around the year 2100 there'll be about 11 billion people, and we won't be able to sustain it much more than that. And then the third world populations won't be having babies as much, because the average of the world back in 1950 was to have 5 babies per woman because of advanced medicines and being able to do it and passing it around the world. Although a lot of the populations that were majoring the major cities here had already reduced themselves to 4 or less. I think the number is 3.8. And so you can see certain populations are starting to grow and take off and really get out of hand. They believe by 2100 it'll average about 2 babies per woman, or just over that amount, and the population wouldn't grow so much. Whenever I was a kid, they thought that the population would have leveled off and peaked and fallen down quite a long time ago due to just illness and things like that. But due to modern medicines and the fact that we can pass things around due to airplanes and all of modern society and stuff, to get something to these foreign countries and help them out and to get rid of sicknesses and plagues that they would have and illnesses. And so it's helped them to grow quite a bit. In fact, an envelope and just envelope and envelope and grow. It, it also looks that a lot of them wouldn't be able to sustain themselves without assistance, and that causes another issue and a problem whenever you've allowed their population to grow, and in fact egressed it to grow, and yet it's caused even more of a strain upon themselves and their own civilization itself. So we have to look at that and try to keep from overpopulating the world and ruining it. When there was 2 billion people in the world, we already had the idea that we were straining on natural resources. It took 200,000 years for our population to reach 1 billion. By the time we had two, we figured out we were straining our resources, and only 200 years later to reach 7 billion people on the planet. When I was a kid, they said by the year 2000 we might have, I think it was 5.5. We passed that up whenever I got out of high school, and you can tell how modern medicine and things has really helped out, and the fact that we've made the world a much smaller place due to technology and knowledge itself. The growth of the planet needs to kind of wane here a little bit. We need to hold on to what we have. Truly, we thought probably by now that we would be a spacefaring people and we could take 1/8 of the people off the planet occasionally to try to use to make spaceships and space journeying out. But the choices we make today, family planning, reduced consumption, pollution controls, things that are causing our habitat to be protected, these are all controlled by the major people on the planet. Most of the third world countries and the people from those countries are unaware of it and its effect on the planet, and making them aware and trying to slow down what's going on really is going to help the planet to subsist a whole lot better than it is now. And the road that we're going on is quite a difficult one, but I think it was quite interesting to show the uh, the amount of ripple and growth that's here at the end of this. If we were to just go back here and look for a moment, if we're at 1900, 1920, and you look at the amount of millions that are here and how it's crumpled up, but this is when it's already starting to popcorn. And I want you to see the amount of growth pretty much across the globe here as we kick it in. And in certain areas it starts to take off, and then even Africa starts to just go crazy here right towards the end. And they're over exceeding their population as bad as India ever did. And again, it's causing a lot of problems for themselves and without subsistence. The island nations here, all the way through Bali and Indonesia, are having a lot of problems with it. India itself, of course, is having some problems with it. America is having problems with it. Mexico is having problems with it. The world is having some problems with it. And I think we need to come to the knowledge and terms of how to keep this under control, so 5 generations from now we don't have an extreme problem that causes us to make decisions that should never have to be made. Like, share, and subscribe.